Anthony, welcome to the Cellar Studio. It's so great to see you. And yeah, I know we've been talking about getting together and sharing some stories, and it's such good timing. We're about to launch our Art of Storytelling course, and I've had so many incredible experiences at your beautiful properties. You know, listening to some of the stories that you've shared of the people in your business, the beautiful place that you work and farm, and some of the golden threads that your family has developed over the years through your values. Can you maybe take us back in time to your dad, and just share a little bit about how your farm started, and maybe some of the stories around your dad and the legacy he started?
Absolutely. And firstly, it's lovely to be here, and I think the topic is very pertinent, particularly if one is serving wine to people. Just a quick analogy: if you walked into a warehouse to eat a meal and you ate off a paper plate, you knew nothing about the chef, you didn't know the style of the food, there was no associated thing. You still get the quality of the food on the plate, but there's no associated background, visuals, feeling, mood, atmosphere, and the stories just doesn't accompany it. And so it's the same with wine. You can taste a wine in a glass, but once you have more surrounding it, it means so much more to somebody.
That's so true.
So I applaud that. Just starting Hamilton Russell Vineyards was, I'd call it a passion project of my father's. He, I think, always wanted to farm and ended up in advertising and made his money there in Johannesburg.
So he started as a storyteller.
Pretty much, yeah. He didn't necessarily tell the stories himself, but he owned and ran the business. And this is something he always wanted to do. So when he had the wherewithal, he set out looking for a place where it would work. Started in Stellenbosch, as one inevitably does. The farm he wanted, Marathi as it happens, Anna-Marie Konitz, who was in control of that at the time, very interesting woman, wanted to sell it to a Melk. And she felt emotional about that. And so that was not available. The rest were either too expensive or not available. So he looked further afield under the guidance of Dezo Pongratz, who he had done some advertising work for the company that Dezo indirectly worked for. And Dezo took him under his wing, and they decided to look further afield and out of the way place. As it turns out, the farm my father chose is in the town of Hermanus, and my grandfather had been going there from the 30s and bought a house there, an old house, during the Second World War. And every Christmas, pretty much, of my father's life was spent in Hermanus. So the place had emotional resonance. And he found a farm there that he managed to buy for 53,000 Rand in 1975. February the 27th, 1975. So wow. Price of a nice car. Admittedly, the Rand was a lot stronger versus the dollar then. But here we are.
That's incredible. And so, I mean, coming from Johannesburg, and from I assume that corporate business world, what do you think drew him to farming? I mean, it's such a farming, I think, attracts so many different types of people. You've got, for me, it often comes down to just like nature and being kind of communing with nature and getting into natural rhythms, which you don't necessarily get living in a city. You don't notice these things as much. What do you think sort of drew him to farming?
Well, that's very, very relevant. I think the connection with nature is part of almost a spiritual need in people, particularly in the absence of any particular religion. And advertising is entirely people-centric. It's kind of, so even more than living in a city, we had a nice garden. We had felt the neighbors grazed cattle. Johannesburg wasn't very built up. So there was a little bit of nature drifting in, but basically that entire career working with people in a people-intensive environment just makes you hanker for a bit of closeness to nature. And to me, wine is kind of a bridge between that closeness to nature and culture and people. It's a wonderful bridge. So you start with falling in love with wine, and this was like backward integrating from that. He always said he came at wine through the glass, not through the soil. And he carried on living in Johannesburg, and we'd go down for family holidays. So he only spent 1 year of his life on the property, sadly, but his passion project remains.
Wow. And then, it's sort of like the proverbial dog that does finally catch the car. You've got the farm as a family, and was it just Fynbos, or was it what was actually cultivated there? What were some of the early sort of steps that you took as a family?
Well, it was, there's a wonderful story. I don't want to sort of run over time, but when he was looking for a property with Des Pongratz, he was driving with Des Pongratz, and they had a real estate agent who went up this single track dirt road that leads into the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, now obviously tarred and 2 tracks. But suddenly the real estate agent raced ahead in a big cloud of dust, turned up into what is now Hamilton Russell Vineyards. The house at the time, the main house, was just in from the entrance, knocked on the door and said to the then owner, Mr. Carstens, "Listen, I've got a mad Englishman here who wants to buy a farm. And is it for sale?" And the guy said, "Make me an offer," kind of thing. And then the real estate agent sort of ran back and sort of stopped them, or drove back, stopped them and said, "Come on in here." And that sort of serendipitous find of something with the emotional connection to Hermanus, I think, accounts for us being there to a greater or lesser extent. It was a failed sheep and wheat farm subdivision. It meant the sizes were sub-commercial in the way things were farmed at the time. And a little bit of vegetables grown, but basically down and out, hence the low price for buying it. There was Fynbos, but overgrown with Australian aliens. There was a attempt to sell sand in an area which is now actually a Sauvignon Gris block on sandstone for Ashbourne. There was a sand pit, basically, with bit of water running through it. So everything was developed from old wheatlands, which had reverted to some form of Renosterveld, to Cape Mountain Fynbos, but all degraded, overrun with alien vegetation.
Wow. And do you have any insights into when the valley was named Hemel-en-Aarde? Like, what is the background? Do you have any insights in that? Heaven and Earth.
It's a lovely name, very evocative, hard to pronounce in American and hard to understand, but most Germanic people, certainly Dutch and Afrikaans, know what it means. There was a brother Schmidt in 1899 who came to the then leper colony in the heart of the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, that section of the 3 appellations. And he said something along the lines of, "It's no surprise it's called heaven and earth, because everywhere you look, you're surrounded by these beautiful mountains. You look up and there's the sky." So I think it was predated from that. So probably, late 1700s or something like that, someone would have called it that. There was grazing granted by the Dutch. And when the British took over, basically they moved the lepers in that leper colony to Robben Island.
Wow.
But it was always been something of a place of healing. There are lots of things, and there's supposed to be ley lines in the valley, and a lot of sort of hippies and artists like going there. It's got a very good upbeat feeling to it.
It does have that energy there, and I think also that mountain water that comes tumbling down, just so healthy and refreshing.
Yeah.
What were some of your early memories linked to the farm? So much of, now having a small daughter, you realize like just how much you embed in them at an early, just an appreciation of nature or whatever it might be. They start to get a sense of those values. What were some of your early memories?
Well, I guess I was 12 when that happened, and I always have the feeling that probably between the ages of sort of 9 and 13, it's when you become more explorative as a person. It's the first time you sort of leave the safety of parents and go exploring on your own and bond with the nature that surrounds. And the place you are when that happens sticks with you for life. So if that's happened, say, in Dahlstrom as a young person, and you come down to the sort of green, lush Cape, at a lower level, it doesn't resonate quite like going back to where you were at that age.
That's so true.
So I was 12 in 1975 when the farm was purchased, and got a motorbike, would go riding around. Obviously, no need for helmets and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, in those days, I did quite a lot of bird shooting, so I'd just walk and do rough shooting around, Franklin, guinea fowl, that sort of stuff. And I've got very excellent memories of that. And then, just some of the overgrown areas are sort of nice places to adventure in. So, yeah.
Wow. And it's so different, Hamilton Russell Vineyards. It's such a different story. Many of the Stellenbosch vineyards, it's all about, heritage and carrying on the traditions and trying to maintain. But it's, when you got more involved in the farm, it was after having gone and done your own career development. So there's been different foundings in a way of the property. Can you maybe sort of explain a little bit that journey as well, how you got involved?
Well, different foundings is a good way to put it. It was a passion project, and if it paid for groceries at Christmas, that was good. It wasn't my father's intention. He didn't set out to make it a commercial venture as much as just something he really wanted to do, and he achieved an awful lot doing that. For me, it was different. I had no other income. I had been in the UK. A lot of us left the country as apartheid got really nasty in the mid-'80s. Posted our passports back, went to live and work elsewhere, not expecting necessarily to be able to return. And with Mandela's, I did sort of banking. I went to university in England, did investment banking in London, business degree in America, then back to London to do management consulting. And very much like my father in those people-intensive businesses within cities, that hankering for that connection with nature just grew and grew. And with Mandela's release in 1990, the possibility of a return to South Africa started looming. And I finished up work for the management consulting firm I was with, the project I was working on, and called my dad up and said, I'd like to come back and get involved in the property. And he was delighted because he was struggling a little bit at that time. It was difficult times in South Africa back then. And, it was not something he imagined, being a hands-on manager of a wine farm. He was an advertising man from Johannesburg, and when it was required that he was a hands-on manager, it wasn't what he'd designed for that part of his life. So he was relieved. I had an opportunity. And Mandela out of jail, the world markets opened up, and suddenly there were possibilities to grow internationally. Wow. So, and there was no insight on my side, about that. It was just passion. That backlash against the life that I'd chosen in London.
Wow. It's interesting because I think there is so much of that happening right now as well. So many people seeking out, living out of the city, in farming areas. It's really interesting. And at that stage, your dad had established the first vineyards in the valley, including Pinot Noir. Is that right?
Correct. When I took over, we had, I guess, 11 wines if you count reserves and other diffusion things as part of your range. We worked with 8 grape varieties and we purchased grapes.
Wow.
But to make it in South Africa back then, without the possibility really of meaningful exports, you had to make something for everyone in a small local market. And my decision was to do what we did best for the world. And the property had shown that Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were exceptional. And it was very easy to be surgical with a business that previously hadn't really made very much money, and just cut out everything that wasn't the best we did and do that for the world. And that was Pinot and Chardonnay. So the first vines planted, Des Pongratz was a nut about trying Pinot Noir. And my father's initial love, obviously, is, like many people getting into wine, was Bordeaux. It's easier to understand. And he'd collected it. And I had the privilege of helping him drink down his cellar when the first Pinot Noirs started showing serious merit off Hamilton Russell Vineyards, because the interest switched more to Burgundy. But there were all those Bordeaux sitting there, and I cut my aesthetic teeth on those beautiful wines. And so Pinot was planted. Chardonnay was not available.
Oh, really?
At that time.
And was Pinot more for was the vision from, because I assume the Pongratz name was linked to bubbly,
but after his death.
Okay, more of a doffing of the cap. Okay, gotcha.
Correct. And the Pinot was a Swiss sparkling wine clone. Everything was leaf roll virused. Not necessarily the best, but we made our first great wines off that. And no, the intention on my father's side wasn't bubbly at all. I mean, economically, it's an unattractive venture unless you've got deep pockets. But he wanted to make a sort of Bordeaux blend, a Pinot Noir. It was a white blend, a Sauvignon Blanc. And then as soon as Chardonnay was available, that just took off. And he was amongst the group that, I won't use the word smuggling, it sounds illegal, but creatively sourced.
Perfect. golf bags. Yeah.
Actually, a pouch from the Swiss office of J. Walter Thompson.
Oh, brilliant. Using the for the sort of the
Yeah.
advertising
Network,
context.
yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay, so then those vines planted in the 80s.
They were planted in the very late 70s.
Oh wow.
Yeah, Pinot Noir 76. And our first Chardonnay made was 82. We were not released. It was experimental, and actually the clone, the wine was a little muscatty in character. 83 was the first Chardonnay released, and I've tasted that last, I think, in 2012. It was beautiful. Still alive and kicking.
And then Anthony, just in terms of the people side of things as well, your dad, yourself. I also read that your dad had, at the time, in a contrarian way, also invested quite a lot in your staff.
Yes. Obviously, the family has a long history of opposition to apartheid from my my grandfather as an opposition MP. He, famously walked out of Parliament over certain things. He was aligned with the party that he then walked out on, and him and Helen Suzman basically were sort of lone voices for certain things in Parliament. And that, all his children, he had 6 kids. 2 were in the kind of the underground. One wrote banned books as a professor over in America. The other one is head of the Anglican Church, or almost a bishop in the Anglican Church. Staged protests. He lay down in front of bulldozers clearing crossroads, that sort of stuff. Slept on the steps outside the cathedral in Cape Town, living on the R5 a month, which at the time was given to sort of black women who had stopped work, and to show that was impossible to live on, and wrote a letter to the minister, every week. So we had that sentiment within the family. And my father, along with a couple of people, John Platter, Simon Bollard, Rustenburg, wrote something called the Winelands Commitment, which basically stated their opposition to apartheid and a number of other things which suggested staff upliftment and removing roadblocks to that sort of thing, and decent pay, all of that.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think there's also like a streak in your family to sort of stand up towards authoritarian behavior. I believe was it your great aunt that took a pot shot at Mussolini? Hey?
Yes, that was in 1926, April 1926, when he was really popular in England, and she ended in a kind of looked like a country house, but you couldn't leave. She managed to make it back to England without. Wow. She was beaten up by the crowd, wow. But and died at the age of 80, I think it was, in 1956.
Wow.
Just had a crack at the dictator of the day.
Unbelievable scenes. Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily advise that.
No.
You can vote against someone or write an article. But
exactly. Yeah. No, wow. And then, I know that the farm has also continued those investments, and you've got quite a few projects on the go for your own community and the surrounding community. Is that right?
Yes. Look, it's a silly business to be in at the best of times. You do it for reasons of passion or sort of personal fulfillment. And I think you realize that I wouldn't call it pyramid building, but you want a legacy left behind. And the legacy that most people, and I think this applies to many in the South African wine industry, they want to have made a contribution to the community, to the environment, to the reputation of South African wine, all of those things. And I've tried very hard with our workers' community to create something that takes them beyond the ordinary kind of vineyard work. And our stellar example really is Bereen Souls of Tesla's-Dal, who began life very young. Not life, she began life earlier, but started work on Hamilton Russell Vineyards as an au pair looking after my 4 daughters at the age of 18. And if you see what she's become now of her own hard work and effort, she has her own wine brand, Land in Tesla's-Dal. She sells in numerous countries. She's off soon to New York and Boston to do wine dinners. She sells around the world a high-end Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And she still works for us, miraculously.
Amazing. Yeah, she's incredible.
No, she is amazing.
You've got a fantastic team. And maybe just sort of the people side of things, it's so interesting to me because I think it's such an underrated component of terroir. Everyone talks about like soil and climate, and that's so important, but the influence on your own values and how you apply yourself and what you want to achieve, that legacy you want to leave behind. How do you view that from a people perspective in the wines you produce? Has it changed over the years, that influence of the human hand in your vineyards and in the winemaking?
Yes, I would argue that it has. Firstly, what my father started as his passion and sentiment has resulted now. Even in 91, I was the only person selling wine in our area. And Bushard Finlayson had started, but were not yet selling wine. They're now 28 using a Hemel-en-Aarde appellation on them, and 13 wine cellars, and growing. So if you think of the employment that's been created, the skills development in vineyards and tractor driving and commerce that is developed out of my father's original passion project, we can be very proud of him. And, the contribution to basically the broader Hermanus area. I think in terms of shaping terroir, certainly the underlying geology is the key factor, and you can't really change that. But the upgrading of soils through sustainable agriculture, the increasing fertility and ability to conduct agriculture on bits of ground that might have been less well suited to it, clearing of alien vegetations, the preservation of nature areas. We have a very active conservancy in our area and 6 worldwide Fund for Nature conservation champions amongst our producers. That ethic has come into our area in a way that is going to benefit it and benefit the terroir and the agricultural potential, I think, strongly for the better. And then just in terms of people, just yesterday, I had a photograph taken, for my records with a member of staff who's just retired, has done every one of our harvests, 46 of them from 1981. And he's finally decided that's it.
Hang up the boots.
Yeah, and he's not all that well either, but that's how much he bought into the idea of purpose for what we were doing on Hamilton Russell Vineyards. He'd seen it grow from nothing to something, which is great.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so interesting to me because I think we all look at farmland, especially from a young age. You see these rolling hills, around Caledon, and it's so attractive, and there's, green hills, and sometimes it's yellow, and vineyards look absolutely beautiful. But, at the end of the day, like farming in many instances is a monoculture. And that's what I love about what the Conservancy is doing, and the WWF Wine Champions. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because you're effectively preserving and enhancing biodiversity, and I that can only have a positive impact on the wines, because the wines have to grow up in an environment, and I think the more diverse that environment is, all the small things that we have no idea that's going on, I think it has so many benefits. Have you seen that as well?
We have, and I think at the moment, I think it's a very slow build, and it's a long-term thing. It's about preservation from total environmental breakdown, just broadly. And I think it's a very long-term build. We do some things symbolically. We have biodiversity islands, because monoculture, as you correctly point out, is a sort of almost a form of crime against nature. And you're asking for trouble, for pests, for diseases and things like that, to just stick them all so close together and wipe everything else out. So we did introduce organic practices into our area in 2015. We trained our vineyard manager over in Canada, where they have high humidity, deep fertile soil, and if they can control mildew and fungal diseases in that environment, you can do it anywhere. If you go to California, it's relatively easy given the rainfall patterns and heat. And in Burgundy, they're just going to say, we've always done it this way, and you're not going to learn much. So Canada was the place that he studied, came back, switched immediately in 15 to more organic practices. And sustainable agriculture is very much part of our belief system. And to get species diversity in the vineyards through permanent cover crops. And we have these little biodiversity islands. I mean, they're symbolic because they're not huge, but in areas between the vines, and not unlike what your father's done here, and you've supported. Bird breeding, it's very important. I mean, where tractors are, no guinea fowl, no, and they do a lot of good in the vineyards. They're not going to lay eggs, and so we have these areas where they're untouched. Just the grasses, everything grows back. We put a few bird-friendly plants in there, and it's kind of symbolic. And then, of course, as outgoing chairman of our conservancy, Nature Conservancy, which I was a founder member of, the goal was to get every farm to devote a portion of the mountain fynbos into privately conserved area. So we've almost completely surrounded the Hemel-en-Aarde with privately conserved Cape Mountain fynbos and dropped fences. So that's helped. And we're the size of Manhattan Island. Planting's 15% bigger than Central Park, but there's an awful lot of nature reserve per planted vineyard.
No, that's incredible. And I think the fact that you've gone beyond just the sort of edges of the farm is so important. I often think of like the English hedgerows, yes, where you create these corridors. And I mean, I love putting up little camera traps in our fynbos garden, and you realize those natural corridors, that's where the animals move through because it's safe, they're sheltered. And then it also does concentrate all that bird and insect life and chameleons, and so I really commend you on that as well. And this conversation has taken such an interesting journey for me because it's so much about purpose and values, and you've dug into the people side of thing, you've dug into the conservation side. I'd love to talk about terroir. I think that's often one of the first things that's spoken about in wine, and we've covered other elements which I think have such an incredible impact. But I'll never forget a road trip I did on a summer's day from the Swartland to the Hemel-en-Aarde. And it was 35 degrees Celsius in the Swartland. The wind was blowing, but it was hot. It was dry. We had a great chat to Eben, and then we drove over the mountain, started getting a bit cloudy in Elgin. We arrived at your property and you welcomed us, and this fine drizzle kicked in. The southeaster was blowing, and so you have to grow vines in a specific environment. Can you maybe elaborate on some of those challenges and gifts that nature's given you?
Well, that's ultimately a 3-day seminar, and I'll try and keep it very short. Our most overriding influence climatically is being 1,500 meters from the cool South Atlantic with the Benguela current coming up from Antarctica. That moderates temperatures, less diurnal fluctuation, more sunshine hours within the optimal band for vine function. Okay. They don't shut down when it's too hot. They start functioning early because it doesn't get too cold, and we don't get frost. Those are good things. And then the fortunate occurrence, the happy accident of geology that enabled us to make a style of Pinot and Chardonnay that's more aesthetically attuned to Burgundy than the New World is not cleverness in the cellar. It's the presence of shale, 400 million year old shale on the surface for close to 330 million years. And the clay content approximates the Côte de Nuit in Burgundy, 35 to 55%. Difficult soils to farm, marginal, low vigor vines, naturally low yields. All of that makes it commercially difficult, but gives you the possibility of doing something with Pinot and Chardonnay that is rare in the New World. And that was our stroke of good fortune.
So what does that clay do for you? I mean, it holds water. I assume that creates more texture often in the wines. What is it specifically doing for you?
There's a soil scientist called Claude Bourguignon that wrote a book, and the one thing that he found in Burgundy across all the different crus, you can cross a road and a wine can sell for a third the price of one from the other side of the road. And he wanted to work out how all these terroirs, which were found empirically, what the common factor was in the difference. And it was the internal surface area of the clay. So clay is very, very fine-grained particles, has a very high internal surface area versus sandier soils. or even say some of the ironstone soils that you might have
it's all
here.
gravelly here. Yeah.
And that gives a greater opportunity for cation exchange. What that actually does to the wines, I have no idea. We also have a huge amount of iron in our clay. It's a very iron-rich clay. You can get white clays, and that's probably less attractive. We've got very red clays and pink clays and purple clays. So that's just, again, manifests in the style of Pinot we make. If we don't like the style we make, there's not much we can do about it. That's what the terroir does. But at the same time, they hold water well, but sometimes too well. They're cold in spring, so the first root flush doesn't happen as easily, which can create problems. And their waterlogging is also a problem unless you have a decent slope. So they come with their hazards. Shallow root systems, they can't penetrate that really pure clay you could bake a brick out of, not far under the surface. So we've had to learn to farm those soils. And we were the first, I think, to farm those soils with Pinot and Chardonnay, and the results showed.
Yeah, they really do. And how has things changed in the cellar over the years? Because it seems to me that the wines have just gotten more and more purity of fruit. But that's also my palate.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it was an intention. The thing that came easily to us was structure and spice. What came hard was that sort of open fruitedness. Now, when we made wine in Oregon for a period of time, our challenge was to stop them being too open fruited and get more structure and spice. On Hamilton Russell Vineyards, it's the reverse. And if we could work towards somewhere in between the two, that would be perfect for us. And we have. And I think when you taste this 2025, you can see some of the steps that we've been taking. And this gets perhaps a little bit technical, but first and foremost is not excessive use of wood. So even though we use a lot of new wood, it's our own toast that we've developed over the years with our French cooper, who also supplies Domaine Romney-Conti. So our wood's drying yards away from theirs.
Oh, brilliant.
In Burgundy. And I've worked with them for 34 years. And they make a special toast for us, which doesn't, you won't pick up wood in the wines. You'll get the beneficial aspects of it without the competition with the aromatic profile it can deliver. So that's the first and foremost thing that we've had to finesse. And then when you take, say, for example, Pinot Noir to barrel, after pressing off the wine, it's fermented on the skins in the fermentation cellar. If you take it over with a lot of solids, after malolactic, you can mute the fine fruit perfume. You can get some other odors and interesting things developing on the nose, which masks it. So we now have special tanks redesign of the cellar to settle out and take it over as cleaner wine to mature in the barrel. That's been a big step forward for this, as you point out, that finer fruit, that more fruit perfume on the Pinot.
Yeah.
Will never be a fruit-forward style.
No.
The terroir doesn't lend itself to that, much as Burgundy is never known as a fruit-forward style. But what we do have is a muscularity, a spice, and a structure, which not everyone wants in Pinot. But collectors of great Burgundy expect it and like it.
Yeah, and it's that's what I love about your wine. I think beyond just when you take a sip, for me, I think about all the stories we've shared and over the years, and it's very evocative when you can enjoy a wine that's had all those interactions at the property. But for me, it bridges the gap between that old world and new world style. It's very unique. It's got all the elements that I love in a Burgundy, but that I do love that fruit that it's developed, and yeah, well done. It's absolutely stunning.
Thank you. But you touch on a point. We're not alone in bridging that gap. South Africa overall as a country, I think, holds your hand from the more accessible New World styles towards the more austere and complicated classic styles from the Old World. South Africa is a wonderful person to sort of grab your hand and take you towards that.
Yes.
And a tremendous value as well.
Yes, the value is incredible. Anthony, when it comes to sharing stories about your wine with guests, I'm putting myself in the shoes of some of our incredible learners across the continent, and many of whom would have met you on the masterclass, and some of whom have visited you in person. how would you like them to share your story? I mean, there's so many stories within a story, so that's why I'm glad we covered all the ground. But I feel like it's important to somehow convey just how special this wine is and how purpose-driven it is. How do you evoke that?
Oh,
It's difficult because you're also a very humble, seller as well. You're not out there sort of beating your chest. It's not.
no.
Yeah.
Well, you spoke about the history that a lot of Stellenbosch comes with. We have to make ours. And we got a bit of a complex about it. So, if, from the architectural styles to the way we behave, we want to sort of exude a bit more history than we actually have. Founded in 1975 doesn't have a ring to it versus sort of 1600 and something.
Yes.
But I just want to get back to the point. You're doing great things training people to serve wine to guests. The joy that guest gets out of drinking that wine is not just about the quality of what's in the bottle. That's assumed. If you're in business and selling at your price point, the wine had better be good or you're out of business.
Totally.
So that can be assumed. The thing that adds to the quality of that experience is the story surrounding the wine. Hence my restaurant analogy. It's not just what's on your plate. It's everything surrounding what's on your plate, from the visuals to the beauty to the service to all of that. And I think with wine, whatever anecdote you have to accompany that bottle is going to add value to the person drinking it. And if the ethic is positive in the property, be it conservation, attitude towards people, attitude towards environment, that adds value to its consumption. It's more enjoyable drinking a wine, knowing that. And then the other tiny little anecdotes can relate to the people you're serving. If someone is, Italian, you might want to tell them that this person's great aunt tried to shoot your Mussolini. Yes. These are little things that people remember. Or you might talk about a visit to the property, what it's like visually, the beauty of it. I can't get as excited about wine made in a commercial lot. And it's the same wine. It doesn't matter. The wine doesn't look around and say, I'm going to be an ordinary wine because I don't like the architecture or the location of where I'm being made. But there is something about that evocative beauty that is in abundance in the Cape Winelands that needs to come across with the consumption of the wine.
Yeah, and I think that concept of all great wines have a true address. An address is the place component, which we've spoken about, but also the people that shape the wine and that whole culture that you've created as a team. Is it true that is it your Pinot Noir that was one of the first South African wines served in France in a Michelin star restaurant?
Quite possibly. We're in about 30 plus Michelin star restaurants now in France, including quite a few 3 Michelin star restaurants. But then I think it's the broad aesthetic of the wine that appeals. If you're going to have to put something from the New World on your list, as they feel obliged to do because of international clientele and also wine list ratings, they want to pick a wine that is not a total disconnect with the overall aesthetic style of the wines. I do want to just touch on blind tasting wines.
Yeah, it's a topic that's come up recently in Wine Magazine.
Because we feel that you can actually take an aesthetic product and give it an absolute quality rating, which I don't think you can. Mm-mm. If you have a panel and you average scores, however you do it, it becomes something of a nonsense and you end up rewarding more consensus wines. If an individual rates a wine, all they're saying is, in my opinion, and you can disagree or not disagree, and often those individuals are remarkably consistent, but you can say, I like what they do for me with, say, Bordeaux's or with Chardonnays. I'm not so fond of what they do with Pinot Noir. There's an honesty in it. But to strip away all the associated beauty of the surrounds, the attitudes, the ethic of the property, which is so much part of the pleasure of consumption. Effectively, when you blind taste, you strip all that away and you say it's not important. Only thing that matters is what it tastes like, and it gets a score. So imagine going into an art gallery and looking at all the paintings and seeing one gets 95 out of 100, one gets 89 out. Not going to affect what you think at all of that painting. It's what resonates with you that matters. And what resonates with you is also all those surrounding things, those stories that you speak of, not just the product in the bottle.
Yeah, and since it's such a sensory experience, we all, as you say, you interpret art differently because it's a sensory experience that triggers emotions. And I think that's one of the wonderful components of wine is it's sensory, and both consuming the product and enjoying food and engaging with friends, as well as the stories behind what's in the glass, creates that emotional connection, which is the really fun part of it.
Correct.
One of the elements that I think you've also been really successful at is your focus and your focus in storytelling, because it is so easy to have a stable of brands, like when you mentioned the beginning of the wine journey, having 11 different wines, but you've maintained a huge amount of focus in your wines. And we can touch on Southern Rite, Ashbourne, but I think that's also been a hallmark of your success, is that very focused story that you want to tell for each component for different brands, rather than trying to have like 10 wines in the same brand. It can get quite cluttered.
Correct. And my rule is 1 red and 1 white per property. Under financial duress, post-2008, we have broken that rule, regretted it afterwards, but survived on it. But 1 red, 1 white. So in effect, what we're saying is not we make Pinot and we make Chardonnay, but these are the 2 wines that best express the beauty of the place we farm. And if consumers suddenly want Syrah or Merlot's on a little bit of an up or down, that doesn't affect our behavior. We're just doing what we do best on our property. And somewhere in the world, there are people that appreciate that. And the world is available to us. So that's been the rule. But everyone needs to grow. You've got one daughter and another on the way. One wants to take holidays to provide, school them well and all of that. So you do need a degree of income. And to achieve that, I founded 2 other businesses, non-competing but shared resources, overheads, and Ashbourne and Southern Rite. And those have been very helpful for the overall business, but they don't compete with the purity of what we stand for in Hamilton Russell Vineyards.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I think it's also been a really smart way to also support your people. You've got some of your team, I believe, have equity in some of the businesses, and those stakes also help to create longevity in their careers, opportunities for them.
Yes.
Brilliant. So, yeah, Anthony, I'd love to just conclude our discussion. I mean, we've spoken about purpose, values, the people, your family. We've spoken about some of the elements around conservation, sustainability, your community, all these little touch points. And in the end, it culminates in the glass. So I'd love to have a little taste together with you. Can I top you up here, Anthony? It's a little bit. Of course. It's a little bit short there.
This is the stage we're at. The wine is just about to be released, and we're counting the fingers and the toes. You know how you felt when you took your firstborn back from the hospital. Yes. A mixture of nervousness and just sheer joy.
Sheer joy.
But 25 will go down as a great vintage for South Africa.
Yes.
I've heard that across the board. We find it in Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay and Pinot, Pinotage. It was just easy after the challenging 2024, following that massive storm in 23. So everything worked for us. We didn't make very much, which I guess economically is a consideration. But in terms of what's in the bottle, we've got to this dark fruit, which is a signature for our better vintages and generally for the terroir. We have that muscularity of structure, sometimes why we decant this before serving it, because it's very young. And we have a fruit profile that's distinctly not New World. This was commented on when I showed this in Denmark recently. Lovely fruit and not New World fruit. It's not just sort of cherries and easygoing. It's got a sort of a dark, wild fruit and cassis, which I often associate with New Saint-Georges and those kind of areas, but a wildness to it. And aniseed. And
it's absolutely delicious. Yeah. I mean, it's...
Well, the Gabriel glass does help as well.
Yeah, but this wine is in its perfect temperature. Yeah, and I think that's why this conversation has been so valuable to me, because I think we didn't dive into the wine right at the beginning and unpack the flavor and the texture and all those components, which are really important. But we created that context of all the elements we spoke about: a beautiful place, the human hand, the purpose, the values which you exhibit as a family, and then the outcome from that is what's in the glass. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. I also like the fact that there's nothing we make that you can't get that we think is better or more special. The moment you have a proprietor's reserve or reserve, you're saying to most of your customers, you can't please buy this wine. It's not the best we make. But so we're against that concept. And the moment we apply our own aesthetic judgment on the parcels of grapes and exclude to get towards something we think is better, a huge swathe of our customers would disagree with us.
Yeah.
And we're just inflicting our aesthetic on it, whereas this is a reflection of the place. This is the aesthetic of a place, not of the owners of the place or the winemakers at the place.
Beautifully said. Anthony, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Cheers to you. And cheers to many glasses of your Chardonnay, Pinot Noir being served across Africa.
Thank you, and we really appreciate all you do to educate people and bring that fine wine culture across the continent. Thank you for that.
It's a great pleasure. It's a lot of fun. Cheers.
Cheers.